tired. I'm not even doing anything, and I'm like tired.
It's funny that if you don't expend a certain amount of energy, it does wear you out. It does tire you out.
Ah, interesting. So what have you been doing to keep busy?
Well, I take walks every now and then. I have 2 cats, so I have to chase them about. And
Oh, that's adorable. What are their names?
my oldest is Serena, and my youngest is Phoebe.
I can't. That is so cute. That is so cute.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Tribunal where we talk about all things Power Rangers, including the actors that play them. My name is Brandon.
I am Lena.
I'm Will.
And today, the 3 of us are back. We are back. We are back. We've been recording all weekend. So be prepared for some great content coming for you this week. But today, on this episode, we are joined by a special guest.
Very special.
One by the name that many Ranger fans do know. Also, one of the originators of the franchise, Mr. David Felding, who played Zordon. Sir, how are you?
I am fine. Teleport to the command center immediately.
Oh my god!
Yes! That's amazing.
Oh my god! I just had a moment.
Was that a good enough intro?
Oh, that was amazing.
Oh my god! Y'all! Oh my god!
I'm shaking now. That was so good.
Me too.
Oh my god. Ooh, okay.
And it still sounded so good. Wow.
I know. I got goosebumps. Oh.
Me too. Oh wow.
Oh, that was
Wow.
amazing. Thank you. Oh my god.
That was
I'll
epic.
do it again several times throughout the cast. So,
Oh.
I
That
must
was-
maintain my Zordonness.
Oh, that's great.
Wow. Wow. I'm totally speechless. That was amazing.
I think I'm about to cry.
Wow. So Zordon. I mean, David. let's get right into this.
sure.
Wow. So with voice acting and everything, you're incredible. How did you get into voice acting? Was it just always something that you always wanted to do, or how did that happen?
When I was in college, I did my undergrad work at what at the time was called Southwest Texas State University in San Marcos, Texas. And while I was there, I got the opportunity to do the voice for a film strip that would go out to local schools. It was all about the Edwards Aquifer, the underground water supply that fed a number of communities in the Texas Hill Country. So that was sort of like my first voice acting job. And then I went to the University of Pittsburgh to get my Master of Fine Arts in Acting and received additional training. But it wasn't until I moved out to Los Angeles that I actually started to do professional voice work. Zordon is the actual first, what I would call like professional voiceover job that I had. And when we were working on the show, a few of the engineers had side projects that they tapped me to help them with, and I did voices for some cartoon pitches that guys were working on. I provided the voice of God for a religious project that one of the guys was doing. And then when I left LA, I moved back to the East Coast and got involved in the video game industry and did a lot of voices for Dungeons and Dragons games. I did voices for a real-time strategy game called Empire Earth. I think I did like 99% of the voices in that game. And then all the games that I worked on between the years of 1995 and about 2005, I was involved in some way doing some sort of voice work, or I was coaching the people that we would bring in to do voices for the games. So that's sort of like my experience in a nutshell. So
Wow.
Wow. So it was just like basically it was like one thing just basically kind of led to another, led to another, led to another, and that just spawned your entire career.
yeah, I mean it's very interesting because cartoons have been around for a very long time, and there was always voice actors and stuff, and it was very fortuitous the time that I moved to LA and sort of like stepped into this role, and was sort of like I had a backdoor way into an industry that has taken people a long time to get involved in. Voice acting can be very hard to break into because I'm not sure if it's as true today as it was back in the early 90s, but they tend to use the same people over and over because those people, they have a wide vocal range and they can do a great variety of different voices and make themselves sound like 60 different people. And so engineers and people that needed jobs or had projects where they needed voice actors, they tended to use the same people over and over because they were reliable, they got the job done, and they also had a wide variety of stuff to draw from. So there were a few loop groups, what they called, that's what voice actors call a small group of people that work over and over. It was a loop group, and trying to break into a loop group was very, very difficult. It's not like there was sort of like an apprenticeship program where you would study for 6 months and then start to make work or get jobs after jobs. Competing and auditioning for those jobs is very, very tough. And so if you're lucky enough to snag one of them, if you get a job working for Funimation or one of these other groups that does voice dubbing for anime and stuff like that, everybody wants to hold on to those jobs with tooth and nail because they're very hard to come by.
Gotcha. No, and that makes sense. I mean, it's almost kind of like that. Like I honestly feel like it's kind of like that still in a way because you still see pretty much most of the same people in like anime and stuff like that. If you look in the credits, like it's normally the same names. Johnny Youngbosh actually.
Yeah. I mean, it's a very delicate industry too. It's very much like a professional singer, and you can blow out your vocal cords. You can injure your voice or strain your voice, and if you strain it too much, and if you cause scars on your vocal cords or whatever, you can't achieve the same tones and sounds that you did before. So if you were doing like a character voice for 10 years, but then you have a vocal issue or a throat issue, and you can no longer sound like that character, then you lose that job. So
wow.
And how many singers have you heard about that they've got nodules on their vocal cords or they blew out their voice and they no longer sound the way they did? And, so it can be a very delicate thing, and voice actors take really good care of their instruments, and it's like any other muscle. I mean, the more you practice these voices, the more that you try to work this thing. It's like any other muscle. The more you work it, the better you get at it.
Right.
Gotcha. That makes perfect sense. So as far as like when you moved out to LA and you booked the job of Zordon and everything, first of all, when you got the role, did they give you some kind of like idea of how you should sound, or did you just like come in and just be like, okay, this is how I'm going to do it?
Well, my getting the role was a lot different from a lot of the other actors on the show. A lot of the other actors went through a number of audition processes, or they went through weeks of auditions where they would go in and work with other people, and because thousands of people were auditioning for the show. And when I got called in, it was just myself and another gentleman, and it was like one of the last things that they were going to shoot for the pilot. And I went into the audition thinking that it would be like 1,000 guys. I would read lines and go home and never hear anything. But when I got down to the Saban building, it was just me and another gentleman. And they told us that they were going to cast it that night and shoot it the following week.
Wow.
And the only information that we were given was that Zordon was a 10,000-year-old wizard trapped in the time warp. That's it. There was no in-depth discussion about who Zordon was, what planet he was from, what his relationship with Alpha was, what his relationship to the Rangers were. It was just that he was this leader figure who would dispense mission parameters and advice to the Rangers. So once they told us that, I mean, the other gentleman went to one corner of the room and I went to the other, and we started to read over the lines and waited for them to call us into the room. And I could hear him across the room from me doing a real sort of very strange, wizardy-like voice. It was a little bit higher pitched than what I went in with. And as I was listening to him, I was like, I don't really think that's the right choice there. And so I was just thinking about characters in my head that I could draw upon, that if I was writing something about a 10,000-year-old wizard who was trapped in a time warp who was going to be a mentor figure to some teenagers, that's when I decided to go with like a very deep tone. And so when I went into the room to audition, they had me stand up on a table in front of everybody. And the voice I used in the audition was basically the voice we ended up using in the show. Wow. So I just felt like the deeper voice was much more commanding, much more of a father-like thing. And I guess that's what they were going for because I got cast. So.
Right. I mean, the voice of Zordon is iconic. Like, it's just whenever it's almost kind of like when we would hear it, it's like, oh yeah, we know what time it is. You know.
It's very interesting because they use my face throughout the life of the character for over like I think 4 or 5 seasons or whatever. Yeah. But I only did the voice for the first 31 episodes. Starting with episode 32, it's Robert Manahan who took over the voice, and that's because I left LA. I left LA shortly after the show went on the air. Not because I had a problem with the show or anything like that. I was just very burned out living in LA. I was once I got the job on Power Rangers, it was very exciting, but it was also a little bit disappointing because they only filmed the character one time, and then they would recycle that footage, much like they did with the Japanese footage, and just use it over and over. So I was never on camera. I was never on set with any of the other actors. I felt very disconnected from the show. Much like Zordon, I was off in some sort of time warp while they would go and film all the episodes and do fight scenes in the park, and then I would arrive every 5 or 6 weeks and do voices for 3 or 4 episodes and then go home and never see anybody. So even though the show was becoming very, very popular, I didn't feel like I had anything to do with it. Plus, I was working like 2 jobs and wasn't auditioning, wasn't doing anything else. Was living alone at the time and just felt very. I just felt at that point that LA really wasn't for me, and so I made the decision to leave and went back to the East Coast, and then got involved in the video game industry and everything like that. And it kind of all just worked out the way it was, and kind of forgot about the show until Facebook came along and everybody kept like going, "Weren't you that guy?" And and then around 2011, that's the first time I got invited to my first Comic-Con and sort of understood how big everything was. So.
Wow.
At that point, is that when you finally actually got to meet the cast?
Well, I met the original cast when I auditioned for the pilot. I met Amy Jo Johnson, David Yost, Austin St. John, Audrey Dubois, and Walter Jones. I met the whole cast there, and then I saw them the day that we filmed. But I didn't meet everybody else until, 20 years later in 2014.
Wow.
I met Richard Horowitz, the guy who did the voice for Alpha, and I met Barbara, who was the voice of Rita, and Kerrigan, who's the voice of Goldar. But everybody else that was on the show that was a major character, like I never got a chance to meet Twee, who played Trini, and I only met Jason David Frank like in 2016, I think it was.
That's
I mean, we
crazy.
had known each other. We had traded message back and forth on Instagram, but I never met him in the flesh until like 2016.
Wow.
Yeah, it's very strange how TV shows and stuff get put together
Wow.
because you could be acting with somebody, but your part could have been filmed 5 days ago, and their part could be filmed 6 months from now. So I mean, it's very strange.
That's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, when you watch the show and you look at it, it's like Jason David Frank and I were talking back and forth. It's like, oh yeah, we were talking, but we weren't. So
that's crazy. Wow, that's a whole new perspective now.
Yeah.
Right?
So,
so I'm pretty sure now you've learned a lot about what happened with your character Zordon and everything, about him, dying and all of that stuff. How do you feel about that? How do you feel about that? How do you feel how the character was handled in the show as a whole, something that you created?
I thought they handled his sacrifice with a lot of dignity. The fact that Zordon sacrificed himself and the Z-Wave reduced all the putties back to dust and turned some of the bad guys into good guys. I thought that was a really great way to end it. And as far as I know, they had planned on ending the series there. But because it was popular and because they had sold it to Disney did some other seasons and stuff like that. But I thought they did I think they worked it really well, and it was a very sort of honorable way for Zordon to exit. Of course, I wasn't there. I was nowhere near the show when all that was going on. I found that out retrospectively, and I remember meeting Christopher Khayman Lee for the first time, and I said, "Thanks for killing me." And he's like, "Oh man, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." We got to be pretty good buddies and laughed about it, but yeah, it was interesting to see that
played out, and you didn't even know it was happening until like much later on.
Yeah,
and, so that it's a really new perspective, and I don't think it changed how I feel about it, but like it definitely has now opened up my eyes to be like, holy camole, that whole thing played out, and you didn't even know it.
Yeah, I mean, it would be interesting. Excuse me. It would be interesting to see if I had been there, what changes I would have done differently. I mean, Robert did a really great job as far as like maintaining the consistency of the character's voice. Tried to match the vocal tone that I had set during the first 31 episodes, because what's really interesting about Zordon, at least on the TV show, is and what was different in the 2017 movie with Bryan Cranston. The 2017 movie, Zordon was much more alive in a sense. the way his face moved back and forth on the surface of the ship, the way his facial expressions changed and stuff. So the technology that we were working with back in the early 90s compared to the motion capture that Bryan Cranston used to bring the character to life. Because if you look at Zordon, he's very static. There's not a lot of movement going on there. And from those first episodes all the way through In Space, Zordon becomes much more frozen in time. He doesn't move a lot. His mouth doesn't move. And that's great from a production standpoint, because you don't have to worry about matching lips to voices and so forth and so on. And if it's basically a static image, it's easier to film around and so forth and so on. But it does make the character very distant, a little bit colder.
Yeah.
So it would be interesting, to see what I would have done differently vocally rather than what Robert did. But I mean, that's all water under the bridge. We'll never.
I mean, that brings me to wonder, and what would you want differently for your character?
Well, I'm not sure I would want anything different other than the ability to play around with the vocal quality of it. The interesting thing about Zordon as a mentor character is that if you look at other mentor characters in different franchises, like Gandalf in Lord of the Rings or Professor X in the X-Men or something like that, at some point those characters, they put themselves in harm's way. They join with all the other members of that franchise to sort of take the fight to evil, on the front lines with them. Zordon can't do that. Zordon is unable to leave the power chamber. And so the only thing that Zordon can do, which was great for a kid's show, because, the 6 and 7 and 8-year-old kids that were watching the show were seeing somebody who wasn't going to help them, but he was going to encourage them. He was going to tell them over and over, I believe you can do this. I know you can do this. And I think that's a great message for that age, because it builds the self-confidence. And to see the Rangers take that and say, we got to do this for Zordon, that's a really cool thing about the character. Again, from an actor's standpoint, it's very limiting because you don't do a lot. But it would always be interesting to see, what would have happened if I had stuck around and had maybe negotiated to see if could they bring Zordon out of the tube at some point? Could he have taken on a disguise and been, somebody working at the juice bar, or, had been a member of the Angel Grove City Council or something like that. It would have been interesting, but.
Yeah. Would you say you regret not sticking around? Like, not that.
I can't say that I regret it, no, because some of the experiences that I had on the East Coast, I really, really enjoyed, and I would have missed out on those had I stayed out there. It's always that what if question. What if you had done this, or what if you had done that? There's no guarantee that anything else would have happened.
Of course, yeah.
I mean, I'm very grateful and humbled that I was part of something that is a pop culture phenomenon, and I get the choice. I get the chance to meet people that grew up with it and loved it, and share their experience, and I get to encourage them again. Just last night, I did a little cameo message for somebody who was feeling very depressed about the coronavirus and being quarantined and being away from their friends. And so I got to spend, a couple of minutes with them, telling them basically what Zordon would tell them. It's like, stay strong, be confident in yourself, look to the future and know that things will get better from here. So I sort of get to live it more now than I did when I actually did the show. So it'd be fun.
That's amazing. Even just with you all saying this, I'm like getting so emotional. Thank you. Thank you. I'm getting so emotional over here.
Hold it together, Lena. You can do it. So that's crazy. So even with like all of the Lena, you actually brought up a good point as far as like um how his character has, how his character has what his character would have been like, what as far as like, what he kind of would have wanted to see. But I want to actually ask this question as well. With that being asked, as far as as far as like how Boom is doing the character now and giving him so much backstory and everything, and we get to learn more insights as far as like his origins and all of that. Have you seen any of the stuff that Boom been doing with your character?
Oh yeah, I got a chance to do the voice of Zordon for the Battle for the Grid video game, which takes some of the story from the Shattered Grid timeline. And the last time we had Paramorphicon, we did a live read of the Shattered Grid comics, and that was the first time I got to do the character voice in like 26 years. And it was the first time that Barbara and I actually talked to each other as Zordon and Arita back and forth. And you can find that on YouTube, and to me that's like the highlight of my experience as Zordon, to be in front of the audience and do the character again, and be a part of that storyline, because it is so dynamic and it's handled so much. It really is the grown-up version of Power Rangers, and as wonderful and as cheesy and fun as the original show is, I think the Boom comics and what Kyle Higgins and Ryan Parrott and all the wonderful artists that work on those books, they really have brought it into the future. And my hope, my one wish is that Hasbro wants to do an animated version of the show, and they bring us all back so that the old fans can hear the characters that they grew up with, and the new fans can get reintroduced to these characters and a new thing. And I think that would be fantastic. But again, the powers that be are in California, and they're making decisions about what they're going to do with it. So who knows? But I'm keeping my fingers crossed for that.
Us too.
That's kind of like a dream for me. I know, like with DC and Marvel, they do a lot of animated projects, and the takes of that are so like it's something that everybody could watch, but it's definitely something that won't make like an adult embarrassed to watch.
Right.
So, with the Boom comics, we all read them, we all love them. It's like my dream to see them do, if not a full series, like maybe like a movie or something, like for Shattered Grid or something like that, and bringing you guys back.
Yeah, I mean, I saw the press release or the news announcement that Boom has struck a deal with Netflix, so they've got projects in the works. So, who knows what'll happen? It'll be disappointing if they decide to recast, but if fans get an animated version of Power Rangers, that's awesome.
Oh yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. It's like majority of you all are still alive. I mean, it would make sense, to be like, hey, let's actually bring back, these voice actors, and like make this a thing. But like you said, the powers that be, whatever they decide, they decide. But it would be a wonderful thing to have you back as in your role that you created. I mean, it's like even listening to you doing it is great.
Especially as you said, I mean the backstory and all the additional information that Boom has injected into the Power Ranger saga. I mean, it would be great to be able to explore, what Zordon's backstory is and all that stuff, rather than just exist on the whole 10,000 years, 10,000-year-old wizard stuck in a time warp. That's it. So,
Right.
yeah, that would be great.
Alrighty. Well, now we're just gonna change gears just a little bit because we do have a couple more questions. Now as far as like after everything, after Power Rangers and everything, you've done a lot of other voice work, but we know that you also have been working with Karen Ashley on the Order as well. How did that come about?
The idea is really all from Karen. Karen had been attending conventions for a while, and one of the questions that fans would ask over and over is like, when are we going to get everybody back together? When are you guys going to do another Power Rangers project together? And much like myself, Karen only met other cast members through conventions. That's how she got to meet Aaron Cahill from Time Force and Nakia and Catherine Sutherland. So, we get to meet all these wonderful people from these different seasons at the convention. And Karen had been doing that for a while and had been thinking, how great it would be if there actually was a project. And instead of waiting around for Saban to give a green light to something, she goes, well, why don't we do something on our own? And she had talked to a lot of people, and she had mentioned, I think she had mentioned it to Austin, and Austin said, well, you should talk to David. David's a writer. And so Karen emailed me, and we began talking back and forth. And one of the original ideas that we came up with was that the characters would be sort of like an Ocean's 11 type team, where they would like pull off this elaborate con and get away with a crime or something like that and save the day. But then we went in a different direction and went with more of a super spy, much more action oriented, Expendables type feel. And we wrote back and forth, and we had a first version of the Order script, I think, in about 3 months.
Wow.
And then we spent the next month and a half sort of polishing it. And then Karen had organized a meeting in Los Angeles at Nakia's house. And she had invited a number of people that she wanted to include in the project and didn't tell them about it. And so when everybody kept showing up in Nakia's house and they're like, what are you doing here? What are you doing here? What are you doing here? It was a big surprise for everybody. And because other projects had been pitched to these guys before, they'd been handed scripts, or somebody had convinced them that they had a project going, or something might have been going, but then the money all fell through and stuff like that. So everybody was sort of like wary about this stuff. And Karen and I were sort of very nervous about showing the script to them because we weren't sure if they were going to like it. We weren't sure if they would want to be a part of it. So Karen talked to them about it, pitched them with the idea, gave them a copy of the script and said, go home, read it, take a week, let us know what you think. And then within 12 hours, I think, everybody had come back and said, we love it, we want to do it. And so we got very excited about it. And we put the Indiegogo together. We did the project, and all of us gathered out in Los Angeles for, I think, 3 days and shot the proof of concept trailer. And that's what we showed up on the Indiegogo, and we raised a great deal of money that we wanted to put forward into it. And then the following year, all of us were in Los Angeles ready to go, and then the union stepped in and shut it all down. So we were all very disappointed, and Karen was very, very terribly hurt, and has been since that time trying to recoup the losses because we had to give a lot of that money back, and then we did the graphic novel, which details a lot of backstory that happens before the film takes place, and it's still going on. I mean, Karen has been working a lot to try to pitch it as either as a film or as a mini TV series, and she's been speaking with all the networks and all the streaming services. And again, it's one of those things where you're competing with other people that are doing similar projects, and they may or may not have more funding than you, or more may. So right now, everything is sort of like in Karen's backyard. She's spearheading the whole thing, and I help out when I can. But as far as I know, she is still working really, really hard to get it finished, because all of us would like to see it finished, but we don't know.
Wow.
We don't.
That's incredible.
Yeah, because I listen, the order, like, I know I was one of those people who was just like, at the time I couldn't, because I was like, me personally, I was like in between jobs, so I couldn't really support financially, but I was like, every 5 minutes, I was like sharing, like, oh my gosh, you guys, support if you can.
Oh, I was throwing my money.
Like,
every now and then I'll rewatch the trailer and thought, man, this looks really good.
Right.
Yeah.
And,
It looks so good.
And we've had other people that look at it and go, wow, this is really exciting. What's going on with it? And so I think it has potential. I think it has great potential. It's just finding the right person who wants to take the ball and run with it. So
yeah. No, I remember. I'm like, take my money, take all of it.
Okay. Like, oh my gosh, this looks amazing.
I show it to everyone. Like, you must watch this. Oh, but we still hope.
I was super stoked because that was the first time I had worked with some of these actors, and there's that one scene in the trailer where you see them all fighting in the warehouse, and I'm like going, this is an amazing moment, because here you have all these Power Rangers who are fighting one another. And I don't think that's ever been filmed before. So that was very cool. So.
Oh, that was very cool. So that brings us down to a lightning round now. And it's not as fast as it sounds. So I'm just going to ask you a series of questions. Take your time in answering them. So my first question is, if you could have dinner with 3 people, dead or alive, who would it be?
If I could have dinner with 3 people, dead or alive, who would it be?
Yeah.
Neil Gaiman, Stephen King, and who else? Wow. Madonna.
I like that. That's really good. I like that dynamic. If you could have one superpower, what would it be? And you can definitely make one up.
My superpower would be an incredibly advanced metabolism, so that I could eat whatever I want and never gain a pound.
That's a good one. I could definitely
would stay thin all my life. That would be good.
That's a really good one. I could use that right now.
Listen, I would love to use that so I could keep what I have.
Oh, self-isolation is not doing us any favor.
None.
If you could live anywhere in the world, where would you want to live? And of course, like, your entire family, your loved ones, everyone that you want to be with you can come with you to this magical place.
I would want to live either on the Orkney or Shetland Islands, north of Scotland. That area of the world to me is very. It just speaks to me. It's not for everybody, because the winters there can be rather intense, because during the winter months it's 18 hours of darkness and 6 hours of daylight and so forth. But for a month and a half during the summer, it's 19 hours of sunlight and very little of darkness. But I just find the landscape, the the weather and everything else just very, very appealing. So that's where I would live.
Wow, that sounds really beautiful. Because we're on self-isolation, what is your current favorite TV series or movie that you would like to share with us?
Oh, I don't watch a lot of television. I have Netflix, and so I'm able to binge watch some TV shows that I missed while they're running on network. Uh, and I watch a lot of sitcoms. I'm not real heavy into dramas and stuff like that. I did love the first three seasons of Lost was fantastic. After that, it just kind of all fell apart. But right now, I'm watching Community and loving it. And if you have not watched Parks and Recreation, do yourself and watch it, because Parks and Recreation has the best ending of a television show that I've seen in a long time. So
Okay.
Facts.
Oh, I'm gonna have to check that one out. I'm gonna have to check that one out myself.
Two movies that you might want to check out if you haven't seen them. The first one is Peanut Butter Falcon with Jake the Snake,
Okay.
which is amazing. And Shia LaBeouf is in it. And then Troop Zero on Amazon Prime is an amazing Girl Scout movie that takes place like in the late 70s, and it's just hilarious and fun, and I think you'll enjoy it. So, yeah.
Oh, thank you. I'm definitely gonna check those out. Are you a coffee or a tea person?
I classify myself as a coffee person, but I do like sweet tea.
Oh, yes, I like sweet tea.
The only way to have it.
Right? Now, I know you mentioned that you don't watch a lot, but are you a Marvel or a DC person?
Anybody who knows me knows that I'm a Marvel person, because Cap is the best superhero of all time.
Facts. And he's got America's finest ass, so I can definitely agree with that.
Oh my god.
Well, I had to throw that in there. Sorry. As soon as he said it, I was like, America's finest ass.
I'm simply amazed that I am alive at a time when the stuff that I grew up with, the Avengers comics that I read in the 60s and the 70s, were brought to life in such a way that they became real. And the casting for those movies is just phenomenal. For the rest of my life, Chris Evans will be Captain America. For the rest of my life, Robert Downey Jr. will be Tony Stark. Chadwick Boseman will be T'Challa. I mean, they did such an amazing job. Elizabeth Olsen as the Scarlet Witch. They're just so great. And that 10-year span that they did for that first chunk of what they're doing is such an amazing achievement, from the first Iron Man movie in 2008 all the way to Endgame in 2018 or whatever it was. I mean, and because they all tie into one another, because you can sit down and watch them from beginning to end and have this huge cathartic experience, I don't think anything like that has ever been done, and that's really amazing. That's such an amazing achievement.
No, it really is. I was just gonna ask you, which one out of all the, I guess, Captain America movies your most favorite?
Captain Winter Soldier, the second Captain America movie. Because what's great about it is because it's not a superhero
So
movie.
good.
This is true.
No. Yeah.
It's a political espionage thriller movie. I mean, with superpowers thrown in. And I think that's one of the secrets to the cinematic universe, is that if you look at some of these movies, you can see that they're also genre movies. Like the Ant-Man movie is a heist movie. They're stealing stuff. Captain America and the Winter Soldier is a spy thriller. And you can find these things, and I think that's how they went about it. They weren't just telling these sort of like superhero guys beat up bad guys and put a bow on it, and that's the end of it. They were telling these very specific genres and using these characters in that way, and I think it was just really great.
I can certainly agree with that. If you could be one age forever, what age would you want to be? And what I mean by this is like physically, you could be, let's say for example, I want to be 25 forever. So physically, I'd be 25, but like you would continue to obviously age mentally and grow mentally. What age would you like to be?
23. I had just got out of the Army basic training. I was I was very thin and very well in shape and had all my hair, and that was awesome. So yeah, 23.
That's a good age too. Legal, but not too old. Last question for right? Last question from me. What would you want your legacy to be? Like, what would you want to be remembered as, or what would you want to leave behind?
I think the best that I can hope for is that I help at least one person feel better about themselves, or help them reach a goal that they want. If I can leave something behind that inspires somebody, then it's all been worth it. And I think that's my main motivation as a writer, is to tell a story that's good enough that it inspires somebody else to create their own story or tell a different story. And then, because that's the kind of thing that we pass on to the people that come after us. And my philosophy is that this life isn't about you. It's about all the people that come after you. And it's your responsibility to make things better for them so that they can make it better for the people that come after them, and just pay it forward that way. So that's what I hope for.
Wow. I like that. I like that a lot. And then this is just like an additional question. How did you come about naming your cats?
In 2013, I had been living on my own for a while. I had gone through a divorce. My ex-wife and I had cats. I've always been a cat person. We had dogs growing up, but when I went off to college and everything like that, I found out very quickly that I was a cat person. And so in 2013, having spent about 6 years on my own without any sort of animal companionship, I was finally in a position to get a cat. And so I got my first rescue cat and was trying to think of names and was coming up with these very elaborate, Cats the Musical type names for them. But it came across to me that whenever I was in the room and the cat was in the room with me, everything became very serene. Everything became very quiet and comfortable. So that's how Serena got her name, because she is my serenity. And then 2 years after that, I was in a position where Serena and I had been living together, and I felt, it would be nice if we had another companion. And so I had been looking about for a while, and finally found another rescue and brought her home. And Phoebe is actually named after Phoebe from Friends. She's Phoebes.
I knew it.
She's my little smelly cat. So yeah.
Oh, I had a feeling, but I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna let you tell. That's amazing. Thank you.
Is she crazy like Phoebe?
She's very vocal and a little ditzy. Yeah. So yeah, she's a lot like Phoebe. So. Who I love, by the way. Phoebe is awesome.
I love Phoebe. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that with me.
Yep.
So, is there any other projects or anything that you're working on that you want to tell, want to express, or anything like that?
Sure. I'm very heavily invested in my Lincoln Bright novel series. I released the first novel on February 14th of this year. It's called Glims.
Oh.
It's a paranormal type story. Lincoln Bright is an attuned. He can see and hear things that other people can't. What you might think of as ghosts, Lincoln calls glims.
Oh.
And these glims stitch away at the fabric of reality, and they try to open a hole so that these other alien dimensional creatures called the dead can get in. And if the dead get in, then all of humanity is going to pay very, very dearly with that. So Lincoln has made it his mission to sort of try and stop as many of these glims from stitching a hole in the world and facing down the dead. So that's what those stories are all about. It also involves Lincoln meeting a young 14-year-old boy named Petey who's autistic, and Petey turns out to be just like Lincoln. He can see and hear these glims too. So Lincoln not only has to fight the glims, he has to sort of protect and teach this young boy to do what he does.
Wow. And where can we find this?
Right now, it's available on Barnes & Noble. I can forward you guys a link once we get done here. And I've posted it on my Instagram and my Facebook page and my Twitter, so it's out there. So
Amazing. Amazing. I look forward to reading it. Thank you.
Me too. That sounds amazing. Wow. All right. And speaking of your social platforms, where can everybody find you? What's your handles?
They can find me on Twitter at David J. Fielding. You can find me on Instagram at DJFielding_Zordon. And if you do a search on Facebook for Zordon, my Zordon page should pop right at the top.
Okay.
Sweet. Nice. All righty. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We really, really appreciate you coming and sharing some time and talking to us.
It was my pleasure.
Oh my gosh, I can't get enough of this. This is amazing.
I would talk more, but now I have to go back to the command center.
Oh no, thank you so
Yes.
much. Like, you have brightened our day. You have no idea. Oh, that's amazing. Thank you so much for your
Zordon,
time.
I have a favor to ask you before we conclude. Can you give a message to the fans and the people that are listening to this podcast? Zordon, can you do that first, please?
To all the Power Ranger fans out there, remember to obey the first 3 rules of a Power Ranger. Always use your power for good. Never escalate a battle unless Rita forces you. And you may never ever reveal to the world that you are a Power Ranger.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you once again for being with us. Thank you for joining us, and thank you all for listening. Once again, my name is Brandon.
I am Lena.
I'm Will.
And I am Zordon.
It's amazing.
Oh.
And we will see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.